Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Tier4 Tech Talks. We're back.
Episode 2.
We're back in the studio, and I'm super excited to be sitting down with my good friend, Robert Bouchard, newly minted Chief Digital Officer at Tier4 Group.
Man, I'm excited.
How you feeling?
Great. I feel really good. I'm really energized. We talk about it all the time, getting the right people in the right seats. And my journey in this industry has definitely walked me down this path and get to do really cool things like we're doing today.
Awesome. Yeah, man, I'm excited for you. I think that the team's excited for you. Full steam ahead.
Yep.
That's all I have to say.
Before we jump in, I just wanted to thank everyone who tuned into episode 1. Those of you who liked it and left us a comment or subscribed after watching it, we really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am excited for today's topic. It's a good one. It's really relevant, and it's something that we really need to shine a spotlight on. So today's topic is candidate fraud, protecting trust at hiring speed. So I want to get right into it. Our entire process is built on trust. When it comes to client relationships and partnerships, the trust that our candidates have with our recruiters, trust is everything in this industry.
It is.
So how has the emergence of widespread fraud affected trust in the hiring process, particularly within the staffing industry?
I think we'd be best served starting off with some statistics, and then we will get into answering the question, because I think the stats paint a picture here that the audience should find really interesting. And this is what our data tells us. Over the last 90 days, 34% of our inbound applications are highly likely of being a fake, fraudulent, or shell profile. 4%. That's what our data tells us the last 90 days.
A high number.
Very high number. Industry estimates, this is based on a couple of membership affiliations that we have. 40% of applicants in technology-based roles are fraudulent. And by our own estimates, this is all inbound activity, we estimate 38% of those individuals that are inbound are either fake or what we would refer to as a misrepresented profile. So I say all of that to answer your question, which is ultimately it's a remote first hiring process. And I think when we look at candidate fraud, it's become a very hot topic. And I think it's being maybe overgeneralized a little bit because it's only impacting a few industries right now, primarily technology. It's the main one that we've seen. And when we look at that, we can go back to the pandemic again and point back to when everything changed. We went into a remote first hiring methodology in staffing. And so ultimately what's happened is that bad processes, laziness has created this capability of bad actors to take advantage. And I think the remote hiring plus AI has really changed that trust model, because now job descriptions are being written with AI, resumes are being written with AI. And when we look at what that means, it really more is about awareness of what's happening and where those gaps are in the process. And I think what we've identified is there's some things that actually work, and you're not always going to get it right. But as long as your approach mixes the technology and people, and we'll get into that more, I think it can help combat it. But it's a real thing right now.
Yeah. I mean, so much has changed in such a short amount of time.
Yeah.
Especially when you look back, not too long ago, 10, 20 years ago, I think it was really just background checks and records and information. But the thing is to your point, I'd even go so far to say it's a digital first environment. And so, as technology evolves, so does fraud. So do scammers.
Right.
So it doesn't take a whole lot now, but I think technology and AI specifically has gotten so sophisticated that the old model and these screening tools, background checks, they're just not enough on their own anymore. And so you really need to adapt.
You do.
And so we can't just take information and records at face value anymore. And I think, at least from what I can tell and what I've researched, it comes back to not record first, but identity first.
Right.
And actually being able to find out if somebody is who they say they are. And I think that needs to be the first step. It needs to start there, because if you're trying to figure that out, if you're through the, deeper in the process and you get to the point of an offer even, and you're trying to figure that out,
it's too late.
It's too late.
Circle of variables have not been crossed off.
Yeah.
And I think you made a great point. And one of the things we've seen are some really cool tech companies over the last couple of years that have tried to close this gap. Companies like Ropes, companies like Ref Assured or Checker even companies like Terrific that exist, and to another extent, companies like Alex or Tenzo that are doing digital identity and digital interviewing. Each of these has identified a gap in the process, and it's a validation. So if I think about what Ref Assured or what a checker does, it's an ID me, it's a self volunteer opt in. We're not requesting I-9 documents before an offer is made, but we're just validating identification. And to your point, you have to have, we call it a multi-platform, multi-human, multi-touch process in order to circumvent that. So you have to use both technology and people to continue that validation throughout the life cycle of the candidate journey. Because right now, when we look at, I alluded to Alex a couple weeks ago, they identified a couple of North Korean spies through their technology.
Wow.
And this has been in the news now for the better part of a year, this global espionage and North Koreans infiltrating technology staffing firms and primarily in investment and banking and insurance and stealing contact information. So what's happened is it's no longer just fraud, it's
Yeah.
organized. It's what I would refer to as fraud as a service. And it's not just one isolated individual. It's a team of individuals. And so traditional background checks no longer are enough. And validation is key. Continuous validation is key. Confirmation of identity kind of through the process. We cannot assume that the data is honest. And I think that's the thing that really is a struggle because we want to all believe that we have good quality data. That's based on what is inputted into our systems. And when a lot of that is inbound, let's say 38%, as I alluded to earlier, then that tells me that 38% to 40% of our data in our system is bad.
Yeah, you can't rely on the data by itself
Mhm.
anymore. And so I actually want to segue a little bit and I want to lean into your knowledge here on this next thought. And that is, what does a candidate fraud look like today? What
Mhm.
are some of the common patterns that not even just staffing and recruiting firms should be looking for, but any organization should be looking for? Because I think this goes beyond us. This is affecting everybody. I mean, you just brought up a matter of national security.
Yeah.
So, it's a big deal. And so talk maybe a little bit to what some of those common patterns are. What can people be on the lookout for?
Yeah, I think we in staffing and recruitment use LinkedIn a lot. So we're looking at when was the LinkedIn profile date created? That's one thing. How new is that profile? The amount of connections that those individuals have. We're also looking as far as geofencing and IP detection. Where does the individual actually physically sit? And we're seeing a lot of individuals that are coming from Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, and Africa, as well as parts of South America. And so those aren't individuals that are based in the US that are hitting our systems. So
Right.
there's that. That's a global aspect to it. I think you look at on a resume responsibilities and statements that are generalized and potentially copied and pasted. You can do a lot of reverse lookups and find that as well. Voice over IP phones. When I call you, if you don't answer immediately, that it's always a callback. How the communication takes place. We've also, to your point, in terms of bad actors, we've seen candidates that have been on video that have an actual AI agent answering the questions for them, and they're just moving their mouth. Now, your technology has to catch that, and sometimes it doesn't. So that's where that human in the loop, you see it, something doesn't look right, you dive in further, and you go, okay, we're being scammed here. It's common. It's happening across the board when we look at very organized. It's not just individuals, and it's not just to one region. I know I alluded to North Korea, but I mean it's Southeast Asia as a whole. It's Eastern Europe as a whole. It's lots of parts of Africa as a whole. So it's not just one geographic area that you're identifying. And then we want to come back to what's the communication patterns. And I know I talked about phone, but how are the email responses? How are the text responses? Those are things that we're looking for throughout the process, the candidate life cycle, where we may identify flags. And I always come back to our spidey sense in recruitment that if something feels off, it most likely is. And that's where we want to always make sure we're crossing off those circle of variables as we work through the candidate life cycle.
So, Rob, where do you believe that the biggest fraud risks are today?
I think it comes to identity, really, and protected data. So when I look at what that means, client exposure, risk to client data being shared, private data. I also think about late stage fallouts that could happen and all the time and effort that goes into identifying talent and securing that talent for our clients and then it falling out at the very end. The cost associated with that, it's not just time, but it's time and money. I also think reputation. I mentioned financial risks associated, so private information being shared, but I think reputation is at stake. There's this statistic out there that says our clients, 70% of our clients expect us to have fully vetted a candidate before they start working
Yeah.
for the customer. That's 7 out of 10. So that tells me that as a staffing firm, we have to be doing our due diligence to make sure that every step along the way we've done every validation and check that we have at our disposal.
Yeah, and I think this goes back to trust. And that's something that our business is built on. The relationships that we have with our clients, the relationships that our candidates have with our recruiters.
Right.
So, it's interesting that you bring that up because I really don't think it takes much for that trust to be shattered,
Yeah.
right? And there are some major things going on, like you alluded back to, or you mentioned the North Korean spies that were caught, or just think about like a Fortune 500 company that hires somebody who isn't who they said they were, and they funnel $17 million out of that business, right?
Right.
Okay, those are major things that can happen because of candidate fraud. But even just sending a fraudulent resume or submitting or presenting a fraudulent candidate, or they get
Yeah.
to they get to the offer stage and it turns out that they're not who they said they were, or that their credentials were inflated or
Hmm.
whatnot, that right there may not even be recoverable. So like, trust is everything in this business.
Yeah. Maybe once. Might be
Maybe
maybe
once, but
once.
doesn't that would leave such a bad taste?
It does.
That'd be a crack in the foundation.
Yeah. Well, way back when, John, we used to call it bait and switch. It was a term. Someone would interview and someone
Yeah.
else would show up. Well, now it's the person who's interviewing is the person who shows up, but that doesn't mean that they have the right credentials or
Right.
that they're not acting on behalf of an organized group. And so I think that's how it's changed over the last
Sure.
5, 6 years, really. And we've worked really hard to put a structure in place to make sure that our process is not vulnerable to fraud.
Yeah, I love that. Now let's talk about that a little bit because we
Yeah.
just talked about the themes or red flags that you look for when you're talking about candidate fraud. We talked about the trust factor.
Mhm.
Now, I do want to talk a little bit about Tier 4 groups process and dive into the different tools, processes, and policies
Yeah.
that we've implemented
Mm.
that help us to battle that 30, would you say 34%?
38%. Yeah.
38% fraud rate on candidates, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. I think we realized that we needed to use technology and humans.
Yes.
So I would call it multi platform intelligence. And what I mean by that is really using cross system and behavioral signal analysis. That's super important as the tip of the spear. Next, I would say a multi human verification. And you're like, what do you mean by multi human verification? Well, we have a very senior recruiters that work here at Tier 4 Group, and they've been highly trained on how do we identify and combat, but even the best at times can be taken advantage of. And so that's why we want to layer in that multi human validation and verification. So it's not just about one conversation, it's about multiple conversations with multiple individuals within the Tier 4 Group walls. And then the last thing is what I call multiple touch workflows, and that is iterative validation across the candidate lifecycle. And you've heard me refer to the circle of variables. So that's everything that can occur through the candidate lifecycle. And we estimate that's about 30 different touches along the way in terms of the candidate journey. So it's about those three aspects to our structure to really create a tight process. Because what we've seen that's happened is while adaptive and cognitive intelligence has really helped us in terms of creating capacity. It's also helped the bad actors get better at being deep fake, voice deep fake, video deep fake, using artificial intelligence to do interviews and take interviews on their behalf. So I think it's about the bad processes that organizations have that are creating those vulnerabilities more so than anything. So the way that we've identified it is it's a multi-system, multi-human, multi-touch process.
Yeah, I think you have to look at every stage, like you said, when you have 30 different touch points. I think the most vulnerable firms or the most vulnerable organizations are the ones that think everything's fine,
Right.
the ones that think what used to work still works. And if they're not willing to take a step back and analyze each step of that process, then those are the kinds of organizations, those are the kind of opportunities where I think that you will see more candidate fraud. So you have to have the right, not only the right tools in place, but like you said, you have to have the right people in place.
Right.
You need to have the right policies in place and the right procedures. And I think one thing that's really important too that we should mention is training.
Training.
If a recruiter does not know what to look for, if they don't know how to use the tools or they're not embracing different tools or things that you have put in place to help mitigate fraud, then that opens the door. It's like that employee that just doesn't get it when it comes to phishing,
That's right.
right? To the one that are the one that opens the link, right? So yeah, there needs to be adoption and there needs to be training,
Mm.
and it starts from the top.
It does. And it's so important to us that our CEO has actually done extensive training on what we call spotting a fake.
Yeah,
Built out, it's part of our week 0 onboarding. She does social selling training and she does spotting a fake training. So those are the two things our CEO is doing in week 1 with our recruiting team to
yeah.
make sure that they understand the importance of it because we have to protect that trust.
Hey, sometimes I'm scared to open a PDF.
Right.
I'm like, you're getting resumes and PDFs all day long and all these different things. Mm.
What's phishing and what's spoofing and all the things. You
Yeah.
got to make sure you know what you're opening these days.
Yeah, you do. And so it's good that any member of our team, but people in general are more aware and that they understand what to look for because if they don't, then that's how you fall prey. You just
Yeah.
don't know. You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to for us, we've learned that having the right checks in place at the right time, the right moments in that life cycle protect speed instead of killing it. And we talk about slowing down to speed up a lot. And in this business, quickness, quantity, and quality matter. But we've got to make sure that we've done the validations and the checks that we need to before we put that Tier 4 group name on it.
Agreed. Now let's dial in on that a little bit
Mhm.
because I want to talk about how even organizations can implement processes and policies and tools so that you're not compromising speed and quality in name of fraud detection. So we can't just like a train grind everything to a halt just because there's an increase in fraud, right? We have to continue doing what we're doing.
That's right.
So we have to figure out a way to be efficient and
Mm.
to detect fraud and mitigate fraud risk without losing velocity, without losing the speed that our clients know us for. So talk a little bit about
Yep.
how not only we do that, but how can somebody who's listening, like a leader or a hiring manager, someone building a team, or maybe you work for another firm, what can you do?
So I think there's 3 actions that I would recommend that your organization take. First is validating skills and verifying work history. So reference checks, skill-based assessments,
LinkedIn?
LinkedIn, reviewing that profile as it compares to the resume that's been submitted. The second thing is moving from what I would call a single check to layered workflow. And that comes back to what I refer to the multi-platform, multi-human, multi-touch part of the
What does
process.
that look like practically?
Practically, we use technology as tip of the spear, and then
Okay.
we involve humans in that loop, and then there's a guidance or a journey through the rest of the life cycle that involves that human element. And then the third thing, and you hit on this already, you have to train your teams to spot the modern pattern-based fraud that's currently existing. And how do we do that? It's just practice. It is practice. The more you see it, the more you know it, the more you're going to be aware of it. And so practicing that, training on it, and sometimes even testing your team out on it, really role playing within it is critical to making sure that you get this right. And I think when we look at fraud, and I've hit on this, they're taking advantage of bad processes, gaps in our process, laziness, if you will. So fraud now is more of what I would call an operating model issue than it is an actual recruiter problem. And I think the future really belongs to organizations who can tell the difference between the two.
Thank you for sharing that. That's pretty in depth, and I think if you're someone out there who is looking at talent, trying to hire talent, you're building a team. I think you need to be looking at it through that lens. You need to be able to tell the difference and be able to spot fakes. All right, so I want to close things out today with one last
Okay.
question. And Rob, I'm going to lean into you on this one. After everything we've talked about, what are the top 3 actions a leader can take today
hmm
to outsmart candidate fraud?
Well, I think again, it comes back to training your team. One, that's the most important. They need to know what they're looking for. Having the right partners in place, so implementing the right pieces of technology in that journey to help you close some of those gaps. And then 3, meeting your candidates is so important. That remote first hiring where there was so much transactional based business that was done over the phone without video communication, without in person communication. Like those are things of the past now. And so I think that really is what it comes down to is making sure that you're validating, verifying, and training your teams along the way to really make sure that they have an understanding of what this modern pattern based fraud looks like.
Absolutely. Being able to step back and look at it step by step.
Mhm.
What is your process? Where are the gaps? And then identifying the right tools and
It,
getting humans
and
involved.
knowing who on your team is really good at it.
Yeah.
And then having them serve as peer led training to say, here's what I'm doing, here's what I see, and these are the actions I take once I see those. It's in front of us. It's whether or not we choose to acknowledge it or ignore it.
Rob, do you have anything to close?
Yeah, I think when we look at fraud right now, it's a very hot topic and it is absolutely occurring, whether or not you want to acknowledge it or not. Is it as widespread as we are being led to believe? I think that's still to be determined. As I sit here in the seat and I tell you that 38% of our inbound activity candidates are fake, fraudulent, or a shell, I think that's a pretty staggering statistic. The data that I shared with you about over the last 90 days, 34% of verifications that we ran are highly likely to be fake, fraudulent, or misrepresented. That's a scary number. And if your organization is not doing anything right now to combat fraud, at least be aware of it. Start to identify gaps in your process where fraud can take advantage of it. And then begin to train your teams on how to identify fraud going forward so that you can avoid those risks, so that you can make sure that you're not breaking trust with your clients.
Amazing. Rob, thank you so much for your insights. And I want to thank everybody who's tuned in and listened. We look forward to seeing everyone on the next episode of Tier 4 Tech Talks. See you
Like and
later.
subscribe.
Like and subscribe. See you later.
Bye.